and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
And I'll thank Chris.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm, and welcome back from Scotland.
Ann Northrup, not Chris Cooper, to whom I give many thanks for sitting in here
Thank
for the
you,
last
Chris.
2 weeks. Thank you. You did a great job. My favorite moment was when you corrected Andy about something. You filled in beautifully.
I need it. I need discipline.
We all need an editor.
Yes. Well,
Unfortunately, we don't have an editor for Donald Trump at the moment
yes,
so much.
He's got 2 nominees to the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who will not commit to upholding the agency's policy that anti-LGBT discrimination is illegal. And he's also nominated some seriously anti-LGBT bigots to the federal bench.
We're a little disappointed in Senator John McCain, who appears to be ready to vote for the new heinous health care bill. We'll see. But we're happy because he is supporting the retention of transgender troops in the military.
So Chelsea Manning was the first transgender person ever named a fellow, an ironic title, of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard,
That we know of.
only to have the school jerk it away at the behest and in favor of some jerks.
It really is the most disgusting story, so we will go into that at a little length. And we'll tell you about Edie Windsor's memorial service last week. Andy was there in person. I was homesick, but watching it online. And
we'll tell you how you can watch it online.
Yeah.
The California legislature has passed a raft of LGBT legislation.
And this week there happens to be a lot of news from Michigan.
A lot of stories. At Georgia Tech, the LGBT student leader was shot dead by police,
Leading to a lot of unrest on campus. It's a very complicated story. We'll go into that. And the latest developments from the Australian campaign for same-sex marriage. That's heating up.
And out lesbian Lena Waithe is the first African-American woman to win an Emmy Award for comedy writing, and boy, did she give a speech.
She really did. We'd show you the speech, but it was on CBS, I guess, and the networks don't like us running their stuff. You should look for it if you can. But
we will send you a link to that as well. All you have to do is sign up for our emails at gayusatv.org. Go to our website.
We will show you a picture of her and read some of the speech. It was amazing. It was amazing.
And two things to note this week. Happy Bisexual Awareness Week.
Yeah.
And it's the 6th anniversary of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
And we're also taping on the 44th anniversary of the Billie Jean King-Bobby Riggs match, which was September 20th when we're taping in 1973. The movie's about to open. We'll talk about that in entertainment news.
And Trump is threatening to destroy North Korea in a speech written by the demonstrably insane Stephen Miller. And this is who controls our government.
And Iran, too. So let's start with Trump.
Yes.
Because we like to start with the big picture.
Well, let's talk about some of those. Let's talk about some of those nominees. All right. 2
nominees to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission who had a Senate hearing this week.
Janet Dillon and Daniel Gade, and they were pressed by senators. Will you uphold this interpretation of the current interpretation of the EEOC? Is that that anti-LGBT discrimination is covered under sex discrimination.
In the Civil Rights Act and the Education Amendments.
They refused to say that they would go along with that, even though they said they're personally opposed to
all kinds
discrimination of sexual orientation or gender identity discrimination. That's the kind of thing Clarence Thomas said, upholding the anti-sodomy laws when he ruled on that.
Clearly, and the new head of the EEOC appointed by Trump is not on our side and has already switched things there.
Please.
And It's just another example. In fact, I want to recommend to people that they take a look at the Human Rights Campaign site for a new report from them called Trump's Administrative Abuse and the LGBTQ Community. And what it does, for those of you who need the details and the list, is run down all the ways in which he has changed by executive order or just peremptorily regulations, rules, appointments, policies that pertain to us.
But the most appalling thing is we can occasionally get some Republican senators and House members to vote with us on protecting our rights. But it's not important enough to them to stop anti-LGBT bigots from having lifetime appointments to rule over our lives for the rest of our... It's not offensive enough to them.
Right. No, they feel, because they feel they would be punished by their party if they didn't go along with these people.
Well, let's talk about some of these nominees.
Okay.
The Senate Judiciary Committee has already advanced the nomination of Stephen Schwartz to the, he's 34 years old. He has a history of supporting anti-LGBTQ stuff, especially anti-transgender cases, including HB 2, the North Carolina law, and he's only 34 years old. Now, first of all, he could be on the bench for another 50 years, but he doesn't have what's usually required, 12 years of experience practicing law before you sit for a lifetime on the federal bench. So that's one of them that is terrible.
As you know, they're not playing by the rules. They don't want to play by the rules. They were elected to not play by the rules. So to them, this makes perfect sense.
Let's have a government of people who don't know what they're doing. Well, they do know what they're doing, which is destroying civil rights.
Not playing by the rules.
Well, and then the other one is Jeff Mateer. He's been nominated to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Texas. Now, this guy is the current first Assistant Attorney General of Texas. And he was serving as the General Counsel of First Liberty Institute, one of these right-wing groups. And he has described same-sex marriage as leading to disgusting new forms of matrimony. Transgender children are part of Satan's plan, compared same-sex marriage to bestiality, and he endorsed conversion therapy.
And what's his job now?
They've nominated him to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Texas. Federal court, Trump nominee. Lambda is opposing. And,
yeah, to what end is the answer. And then we have some developments on the service of trans military members. I've heard a lot of commentary going both ways on this. I hear people, reporters say, well, we tweeted about this and then nothing happened. Excuse me, something did happen.
He
and other people say, no, it's a fait accompli. No. They're not talking about whether to implement it. They're talking about how to implement it.
Well, how to implement it, except that they've got to end transgender service. Basically, they're certainly not allowing transgender people to sign up for the military right now.
Well,
they can they're saying they can re-enlist, but they're going to be under a cloud because they don't know if they're going to get booted out.
It's very confusing. It's very confusing because the policy changes every day. At first, it looked like his tweet was meaningless because it was a tweet and because there was a lot of pushback from Republican politicians and the Defense Department and everyone. But then he went forward in demanding it, and then the line was, we can't stop this. It's only about implementation of kicking people out and not letting anyone new enlist. But now, this past week, a couple of things. First of all, the Secretary of Defense, Mattis, issued a memo that said trans service members currently serving can re-enlist and can get appropriate medical care for
under a cloud.
Of course, under a cloud. That's what this whole thing is about. It's not disappearing yet, but the question is, will it disappear at some point? Will 6 months from now a rationale be developed to lift the cloud and let people serve?
Well, everybody and their uncle is suing to stop this. And
Yes.
there are many pending cases across the country.
Yep.
And there's also a bill. And well, of course, they tried to put it into the Defense Authorization Act, and the Senate Republicans cut off debate and blocked the amendment from even getting a vote.
They did.
Because we might have won that vote.
Yes, because, you know, we won the vote in the House a while ago to stop the attempt to ban medical care.
Right.
But the sponsors of the bill that would have stopped the ban, Gillibrand and Collins, are submitting a freestanding bill, and Senator McCain has announced that he supports their effort to stop the trans-military ban.
And it is a bipartisan bill. Senator Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, is on it.
And Admiral Mike Mullen, who is a former head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, also announced his support of trans-military members. The lawsuits are proceeding. The ACLU has asked for a preliminary injunction on the ban while it's being adjudicated. They have a case in Maryland. But as they asked for that preliminary injunction, Mattis did issue the memo saying people can continue to serve and can re-enlist.
But not enlist.
No, but they weren't. That had never been allowed and was supposed to start but was delayed.
Right.
So it's still delayed or banned or whatever.
That's true. I mean, the one thing I do mention in this is that it took until the end of the Obama administration to get around to doing this, to opening up service in any form to transgender people.
But it's still up in the air. No one's been kicked out. Yes, it's all a mess. But speaking of trans people in the military, let's talk about Chelsea Manning.
So, you know, they have these, the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard invites these sort of high-profile people from around the country. Oh, come to Harvard, you'll talk to the fellows, and you'll be a fellow. And, you know, it's a great honor, blah, 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 blah.
Hail fellow.
And they invited quite a diverse group, including Chelsea Manning. And they invited Sean Spicer. You might remember him from the Emmy Award show. And
Corey Lewandowski.
the thug who worked who was the Trump campaign manager for a while. All these people. But then the CIA establishment, some who taught there, like this guy Morell, and others, started raising all these objections. I have to think donors to Harvard must have gotten involved because they rescinded that offer to be a fellow. They say, yeah, you can still speak here, but you can't be a fellow.
Well, it's a little shocking how much the establishment is honored at Harvard in this operation. Chelsea Manning, no, I'm sorry, I'm going to have a little coffee.
Yeah, Chelsea Manning tweeted that she was honored to be disinvited and that the institution was chilling marginalized voices under CIA pressure. And that is exactly right. This is a real disgrace on Harvard for doing this.
She said, this is what a military police intel state looks like. The CIA determines what is and is not taught at Harvard.
And what the hell does Sean Spicer have to teach anybody? I mean, he's nothing but a liar. I mean, Chelsea, well,
the right wing is very happy that Harvard rescinded the invitation to Chelsea, and they're praising the dean there for writing a letter apologizing for having invited Chelsea in the first place because, of course, she is a convicted felon and a traitor to the country.
Well, we should say this guy's name. His name is Douglas Elmendorf. He's the dean of the Kennedy School of Government.
Now,
he has disgraced himself.
Some of us think that Chelsea Manning is a hero who revealed the sins of the U.S. military in Iraq.
And served the longest prison sentence ever for a whistleblower in the history of the United States. And, I mean, for all these people who are criticizing, I mean, even if you believe she was totally guilty, she served the longest sentence ever. Are people like this supposed to be punished for the rest of their lives and made pariahs?
Well, at the same time, Harvard turned down accepted and then turned down the application for graduate work by the woman who'd been a prisoner in, I think, Illinois. I could be wrong about that.
Yes.
Michelle Gross, who had gone to prison as a teenager or young 20s, had been convicted of murdering her 4-year-old child in very murky circumstances, served a very lengthy sentence, was completely rehabilitated in prison, became a history scholar, wrote a very important paper about incarceration, and was offered a place at Harvard, and then they took that back because she was a convicted felon. She's now at NYU. What is this about if you've been convicted of something, you can't have these jobs?
Right.
It's disgusting.
That's disgusting.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something that's not disgusting. Why don't we? Should we talk about Georgia Tech?
Yes, let's talk about Georgia Tech.
Let's talk about
That's
Georgia
a mess,
Tech
yeah.
because it is a mess, and it's also a campus thing.
So Scout Schultz, 21 years old, bisexual, non-binary, was the head of the Pride Alliance at Georgia Tech.
21 years old, yep. Fourth-year student.
Popular, energetic, admired, good with their non-binary family who supported them, but with some history of mental illness.
Had a suicide attempt at one point.
So Scout called 911 and reported a suspicious character on campus who appeared to be carrying a knife and a gun.
And said, "My name is Scout."
Well, first, when asked to describe this person, described themselves.
Right.
And was asked to give their name and gave their real name.
Right.
And then went out and walked around fitting that description,
Yes.
holding something in their hand, not a
Piece of metal.
Yeah, no
which
gun.
Looked like a knife.
One of those multi-tool little things, but without a knife blade
Now,
open.
I've watched the tape,
Me
and you
too.
can watch. It's an execution. The police keep saying drop. No, I believe they keep saying drop the knife.
Yes, they do.
Now they later say, well, we thought there was a gun.
Scout said there might be a gun.
Well, but there was no attempt to wound or to disable,
Taser, throw
something.
a net over.
Exactly, which is what American police just don't, in general, seem to be trained to contain the mentally ill. I have watched the videos of how these things are handled in England, and they can be pretty rough over there in a lot of respects. They had an empire, but they will throw a net over you. They will, and they don't. A lot of them don't even carry guns themselves. But it just looked like an execution.
Well, there are obviously two questions here. One, was Scout trying to commit suicide by cop?
Yes.
Certainly the evidence is there for something like that.
Yes.
But then the other question, which has nothing to do with that, is how did the cops handle this?
Exactly, and how do you handle the mentally ill in general?
Yeah.
So there were major protests on the campus, and they turned violent.
Yeah.
Protesters, we have a picture. Protesters set fire to a campus police car. 2 police officers received minor injuries. 3 people were arrested during this melee.
It's a very sad situation, and the campus is very upset.
Sure.
Yeah. And we're still upset at the passing of Edie Windsor, who was, of course, a hero to all of us and a companion activist.
Yes.
They held a memorial for her last week, a spur-of-the-moment outpouring of probably a couple thousand people at Temple
Indeed.
Emmanuel on Fifth Avenue in New York. Here are some of her friends and colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, look at that. Leave the picture up there. There's some great, right in the middle there, the guy in the white shirt is Brendan Fay, who's the one who brought her up to Canada to get married.
Yeah.
And so that is why she appreciated these grassroots activists, because these are the people who helped her when no one else would. Rabbi Kleinbaum in the blue shirt in the middle presided over the service. On the left there is a military guy and his husband, Dwayne B.B. Franqui, and his husband Jonathan. They invited Edie to speak at to 400 people in the Navy 3 years ago. She did, and they became fast friends for the rest of their lives and socialized together. And right next to them is Blanche Wiesen Cook and her wife, Claire Koss right across the way. And on the far right there is Rose Walton and Marjorie Sherwin, who read I Shall Rise from Maya Angelou. And it was, so it was, and these are the kinds of people who came to this service, who felt connected to Edie. Some of these people have known her since the 70s. So it was a very moving service. Edie was much beloved. She connected with her. And of course, but the person who got a standing ovation there was Hillary Clinton. Now, Hillary gave a nice speech, but I was sort of waiting, listening to it. Are you going to acknowledge that you didn't support same-sex marriage till 2013?
Sort of.
So she put in there, and Edie changed my mind, too.
I doubt that Edie was the one who changed her mind, and I was a little offended at Hillary being there speaking as one of the last people to come out for same-sex marriage.
She was very well received.
I know she was very well received, and I was watching this online, and I was seeing some comments from people, and people were saying, wasn't that a great speech by Hillary?
Well, it was a well-constructed speech.
It was fine.
But there was some great speech. Now, Robbie Kaplan, who was her lawyer, told a lot of great stories about Edie and working with her, including the famous story about the fact that I'm only going to ask one thing of you, Edie. You can't talk about sex while you're my client. Wait till the case is settled. And Edie would say, I disagree with your strategy. But she agreed to it. And then at the press conference, as soon as the thing passed, she started talking about sex again.
We talked a little about this on the radio last week. She has been compared to Rosa Parks.
Yes.
Now, clearly they were both important figures in their movements, and we have great admiration and love for both of them, but both are given credit as sort of accidental activists.
Oh, they're just ordinary people who decided one day to not sit down, to not stand up on the bus.
Yeah.
Or ordinary woman who just wanted to, get her taxes. That's not true.
Rosa Parks was a longtime NAACP worker who had been sent to the Highlander Center in Tennessee for training for civil disobedience. And lots of people did the same not moving on the bus action before Rosa Parks. She just happened to be the one who got noticed at the right time in the right place.
And Edie Windsor's case, now she was an activist long before this, for many decades.
Long time.
Decades. But she might not have been the case because Robbie Kaplan, who took the case, took it independently. The Lambda Legal turned her down. They just didn't think it was the right case to bring up through the courts, and that's a legitimate judgment.
As did a lot of other organizations.
Right.
And at the same time, there were a number of cases competing to go to the Supreme Court to challenge the Defense of Marriage Act. And this was just the one that happened to make it.
Now, of course, I will say that
and she certainly didn't invent the marriage movement. People had been working on that for 40 years.
I will say that I did talk to Jim Obergefell at the service afterwards, and he was there, the guy who won the 2015 case that got same-sex marriage rights for the whole country. And I said, what about you? I mean, were you very active in the movement before this? Nope, not at all.
Yeah. Well, it's a combination. But the point is, there is a whole movement, and there are people of various experiences who have made all this happen.
Jim was, of course, moved by his dying partner, and wanting to do some out of love for him and for the for their and wanting respect for their relationship, and this movement that had built up these cases that he could join and make an issue of, that became the thing.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris had a nice quote that she posted from Edie. If you really care about the quality of somebody's life as much as you care about the equality of your own, you have it made.
I like Edie's quote at the press conference after she won, where she was talking about how she had been somewhat scornful of gay people as, silly queens until Stonewall, at which point she gained some respect, and that she had not come out until she was in her 40s. And the quote I love is her saying, internalized homophobia is a bitch. Yeah. I would highly recommend that people look at the website constructed about her life, eddiewindsor.com. It's got a fantastic array of pictures of her at all ages, looking gorgeous, and lots of information. I also want to acknowledge a blog or column written by Jorge Olivares, who talked about the need for youth to know this history and acknowledge the people who have stood up and
Yes.
put themselves on the line.
And if you sign up for our email list, I will post the link from Temple Emmanuel for the entire service, the entire hour-and-a-half service, and there were some great speakers there. Speaking of history, I saw Dianne Feinstein posted how wonderful Edie was and what great courage she had leading millions. Dianne, you vetoed a domestic partners bill when you were mayor of San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Yep.
So
Well, none of us is pure.
And we want
none of us is pure.
We want everybody to come along. We want
Yeah.
everybody to grow. I'm just noting.
Including ourselves.
Yes, we all have to grow.
We all fall short.
Okay. All right.
Well, you brought up California. Let's hopscotch through the California legislature's work in the last week.
Well, one big thing they did this week, at the behest of LGBT groups, was make a modification to the sex offender registry.
Yeah.
They have one of these forever sex offender registries that has 100,000 people on it, and your life is over if you're on this registry, as some of you may know. And you could have done something as innocent. They say in this, you could have done something as innocent as get arrested for sodomy, way back when or something, and you're just on this list in some form.
Or consensual sex in a park or whatever.
That kind of stuff. So they modified it. Now, I've talked to Bill Dobbs, who's the expert on this. He thinks this doesn't go anywhere near enough to what they need to accomplish, and he thinks it was a backroom compromise. But
so to speak.
The LGBT groups are hailing it as progress.
The legislature also passed a law that prisons must recognize name changes by transgender inmates. The Assembly passed an LGBT senior long-term care Bill of Rights.
They've created non-binary gender identification for state documents. And
they also changed their HIV criminalization law somewhat. They've arrested or prosecuted 800 people since 1988, mostly women and mostly people of color. The current law is not as bad as some in other states because it requires proof of intent to infect, but it still criminalizes basically HIV, and they've modified that.
And if you elect a progressive legislature in your state, you can have some of these things. We don't even have it in New York.
We're way behind. Now, shall we move to Michigan?
Okay.
As we hopscotch the states?
Okay, yeah, let's move to Michigan. A lot of stories in Michigan. Well, so the ACLU is challenging the LGBT adoption discrimination practices of Michigan.
Because Michigan allows adoption agencies to discriminate on the basis of their religious opinions.
So they produced an ad called Kids Pay the Price, and they wanted to drive it.
Our side produced an ad.
Yes, the ACLU. And they tried to put it on Fox News Channel's Tucker Carlson show, just to reach the audience that they want to reach with it.
Fox said it was too powerful.
Too powerful. We can't show something that's too powerful.
But we can show it on Gay USA, so here it is.
I'm a social worker. I would rather keep a child in foster care than allow them to be adopted by a gay couple.
I work with kids who need a home. I believe if a child is gay or transgender, they should be placed with parents who will work to straighten them out.
I believe that if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. If a parent doesn't agree with me, I shouldn't have to let them adopt.
We have laws governing child services agencies for a reason. When states allow adoption decisions to be based on a worker's individual beliefs rather than the best interests of children, it's children who pay the price.
Powerful for Fox
Too
News.
powerful.
Yeah.
The Michigan Civil Rights Commission, we wanted them to declare that discrimination against LGBT people in employment and public accommodations was unlawful under state law, existing state law. That's what Equality Michigan wanted. And they said, we need to think about it, so they put it off.
The Michigan Attorney General, Bill Schuette, is against that interpretation, so the Civil Rights Commission is thinking about it.
And they want a formal opinion from him. And then there's the, more about the East Lansing Lansing case, which we told you about last week, about the guy selling apples, and he sells apples, and he's not allowed to sell apples in East Lansing at their farmers market, the city farmers market, because he runs a farm where the land is sometimes used for weddings, and he doesn't let gay weddings there. So this is a murky case because he's not discriminating in the selling of apples in East Lansing. They lost the case. The East Lansing,
Who lost the case?
East Lansing, the city, lost the case, and they are
The farmer won.
looking at an appeal on
Okay.
that.
It is murky. Not so murky is a decision in Arizona where the state Supreme Court, in a case brought by the National Center for Lesbian Rights, says that the non-biological mother of a child she had with her ex-partner, who was the one who gave birth, that they're both full mothers, and that the same-sex marriage ruling by the Supreme Court says that same-sex couples must be treated the same as opposite-sex couples, and therefore the non-bio mother, after they separated, has equal rights to parental
Very good.
rights.
One more story from Michigan. You know, Kid Rock is talking about running for U.S. Senate there,
Yeah.
and polling says he has massive support from the GOP base there. But here's what he said about us. He said, things shouldn't be so complicated. You don't get to choose because whatever you have between your legs should determine what bathroom you use. I mean, this is the way he talks. Of course, that's kind of the way the president talks these days. But he has no problem with same-sex marriage. How's that?
I think he's a moron, and I cannot imagine why, after all the moron celebrities that have been elected, Michigan would want to elect another one.
All right.
Just one woman's opinion. In Texas, Houston is asking the Supreme Court of the United States to review a decision by the Texas Supreme Court that the court refused to order local governments to give benefits to same-sex married couples.
They do provide spousal benefits to all married couples in Houston.
And they want the Supreme Court to overturn the Texas Supreme Court order. Birmingham, Alabama's City Council next week will vote on a non-discrimination law, including sexual orientation and gender identity, and a contractor's non-discrimination
And the news
rule.
is that this will be the first in the state to be protected from anti-LGBT discrimination in Alabama.
Yeah. And, but in Arkansas, Lucy's Place, an LGBT organization, canceled a hearing for a shelter for homeless youth because they were getting a lot of threats about it.
In Illinois, Wheaton College, which is the evangelical school there, has finally, because there were 4 of 5 football players who sodomized a kid and kidnapped him, said we're Muslim terrorists, did all this. This happened a year ago. The school did not resolve this case. Finally, there are criminal charges that have been brought. That's the news on it. But of course, this is a school where you will be thrown out for having premarital sex.
I know a couple of people who went to Wheaton and are
Kicked
gay.
out if you're in a committed same-sex
activists.
relationship, and you're not allowed to watch porn either. You also have to believe in a literal interpretation of the Bible that about Adam and Eve in order to keep your job.
Well, as long as
But rape a guy, and let's talk about it.
also in Illinois, did you read about the retirement of Richard Posner, the judge?
I did, yeah.
I was fascinated by this because
This
first,
is the Republican judge who's sided with us almost all the time.
he's evolved over the years from being quite conservative to being much more liberal.
And he's very funny.
And he's and very smart. And he's quitting the court because he says, I've had enough of this. I want to go work for the indigent and for the incarcerated who are not getting adequate representation.
I think we should do that right now.
But here's the other sidebar to this. He talks about his judicial philosophy and how he decided cases, and he said, well, basically, I think the Constitution is overrated. I would figure out what I thought was right, and then, I'd find a justification for it in the Constitution.
Okay. Okay.
It was pretty hilarious.
Pretty hilarious. Well, we don't have time. I was just going to talk about the way Daniel Berrigan spent his final years, which was mostly ministering. He was a big, of course, activist, but he spent his final years just ministering to people who were sick.
I think you just did. We are, of course, taping as Puerto Rico is being leveled by Hurricane Maria or Mariah. We want to alert you to a relief fund set up called the Trans Disaster Relief Fund, because in fact trans people often have needs that are not adequately addressed by regular relief efforts. And this was set up specifically because of Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, but I'm sure it will be extended. The Trans Disaster Relief Fund, tdrfund.us.
And another transgender murder to tell you about, a trans woman murdered in Charlotte, North Carolina, Derica Banner. We do have a picture of her in Charlotte, North Carolina there. 26 years old, discovered in a vehicle early Tuesday. They have arrested a suspect in the case. He's been charged with murder, armed robbery, and shooting into an occupied vehicle. She was described as a playful spirit and go-getter who enjoyed life. The 20th known case of a transgender person killed this year.
But that is not the only news from the trans community. And on a more positive note, in well-known international model Teddy Quinlivan has come out as trans. 23 years old, a trans woman, very successful model currently, but felt a need to speak out for the community.
But Portland, Tennessee wants to modify its adult cabaret law to ban drag acts as adult, any kind of cross-dressing or anything like that. So it's terrible.
In Utah, a male gay couple is challenging the surrogacy law, which only allows mothers to access surrogates and mothers unable to conceive. The state attorney general agrees that the law should be gender neutral and is supporting the gay men in their suit against the law.
Catholic University has rescinded an invitation to James Martin, who's written this. He's a priest who's written this book on gay stuff. He doesn't even actually come out and say, embrace everything about gayness, and yet that's enough for him to get banned in some places. And San Diego Bishop Robert McElroy said that the Roman Catholic Church must purge itself of longstanding bigotry against the LGBT community. So, Bishop, we're waiting for you to perform same-sex marriages and stop the vilification.
We are going, did you want to?
Well, in New York, I was mentioning how we're not such a liberal place. 2 anti-gay bigots have been elected to the city council. Crusaders, Reverend Ruben Diaz in the Bronx and Reverend Fernando Cabrera in the Bronx, elected to the city council.
The only silver lining there is that they won't have as much power in the city council as they did or as Diaz did in the state senate.
That's true. And then also in New York, and this is another example we want to give you from New York, is how you can get involved. Some young guy who's a drag performer in New York, his name is Marty Gould Cummings, said, he was upset about the Trump election, and he said, I'm going to get involved. He formed a new club in Hell's Kitchen, which is a pretty gay neighborhood in New York, right above us in Chelsea, and they formed a power base that challenged this over 100-year-old club, the McManus Club, run by a gay guy at this point, a conservative gay guy, Jim McManus, and they defeated him at the polls for the local elections for district leader.
It's a great story of how someone put their anger at the Trump election into action and actually accomplished concrete
And our friend
win.
Tom Shanahan, who's an out gay civil rights lawyer, was one of the people elected to district leader.
We are
international.
Yes, because we're going to run out of time. Australia is the big story. New news: the No campaign on marriage is being run by a U.S. Republican PR firm that helped run Ted Cruz's campaign. They're doing push polling, robocalls against marriage. It's disgusting.
It's ugly.
But our side,
church bulletins, the Catholic Church.
The Presbyterians are against us too. Margaret Court is against us. She says gays will destroy marriage. Christians, Easter, Fathers and Mothers Days.
Margaret Court.
The no ads
and
are
she was dumped from her tennis club for this.
Yes, and the no ads are all about, they're going to teach about trans stuff in schools.
But the head of the Australian Council of Hindu Clergy supported it and said, hey, it's genetic. They're either genetically predisposed Or it's what they inherited from another life.
So the yes side, our side, is doing things like putting Christmas lights on their fences of their homes saying yes. We have a picture of that, yes. And we've told you that the guy running the yes campaign is the same guy who ran the Ireland Yes on Same-Sex Marriage campaign. So he's brought several techniques from there, including this lovely spot of an Australian girl calling her grandmother to ask her to vote for same-sex marriage.
Okay. I haven't spoken to her about this, so...
Good afternoon.
Hi, Grandma, it's Lisa. How are you?
Good, Ted. How are you?
I'm good. I was wondering if I could talk to you about the upcoming marriage equality postal survey.
It's optional or something or other.
It is. It's really important to me because I'd really like to marry Hayley if we have the right to do it and we both want to do it. I was really just wanting to talk to you about it and see if perhaps you could keep an eye out for the survey when it comes through in the post in the next couple of weeks. So, Gran, can I ask you, when you do get the survey form, how do you think you'll vote?
Normally, with my religion, I'd be against it. But knowing how much the two of you love each other, I can't speak more highly of you and Hayley. I would then agree to it. Yes, you know that. I love you. Love is the most important thing in your life. If you're loved, you to be loved and loved back. Share it.
Thanks, Grandma.
Okay, sweetheart.
Thank you. Bye, Grandma.
Oh, thank you, Grandma.
Yeah. Now, we've also shown you some of the horrible stuff that has been written and things posted and graffitied. So the Australian Parliament passed an emergency bill fining threats and intimidation until the postal vote is over on November 7th.
And the far right is having a Straight Lives Matter rally. Well, I think that's great because it just shows what they're about.
But this is disturbing people. Mental health calls are
Of course.
around.
Nobody,
but this is why
we
didn't
went
want
through
this
this in the United States and most of our states.
But this is exactly what they were afraid of and why they didn't want this vote in the first place.
I can always remember Steve Gunderson in the Congress, who out gay guy Republican, saying, "Why are we so mean?"
Well, isn't that the question?
And that hasn't changed in your party.
Well, speaking of mean, in Israel, an ultra-Orthodox member of parliament has resigned his seat because he went to the same-sex wedding of his nephew in 2015, even though he told his children he's against same-sex marriage, but for the family and family love, he went to the wedding. Well, his fellow Orthodox MPs freaked out when they found out about this, and so he has resigned his seat.
Okay, to quote Chris Cooper, let's hopscotch around the rest of the world. In Chile, an LGBT leader there says that marriage equality is going to take 2 or 3 years, even though they've introduced this bill in the Congress.
I think we knew that when they...
2 or 3 years?
Yes, we've said that when they first introduced it. In Finland, an evangelical Lutheran pastor has been censored by his church for performing a same-sex wedding. He sat through the church trial with his feet in stocks in protest. Not socks, stocks.
In Canada, the federal government there is going to announce an advisory council for apologizing to the LGBT Canadians who were persecuted, mostly in the military and in sodomy laws and things like that.
In Brazil,
they're going to have an apology by the end of the year.
In Brazil, a couple of bad stories.
Not 2 or 3 years.
An LGBT art exhibit was closed by the sponsoring Santander Bank after attacks from the right wing. It may open in another city. And also in Brazil, a court there okayed conversion therapy because, LGBT is a disease.
Yeah. That's being appealed.
Yes, people are outraged and are reacting.
And surprisingly, in Indonesia, the school for transgender people has quietly reopened.
Quietly.
We don't hear too much good news from Indonesia these days. The Nepal Supreme Court okayed at-will changes to gender on official documents.
Yeah, you don't have to prove anything, you just have to request it.
On the other hand, in Tanzania, the police arrested 20 suspected people of being gay. They were at a conference on HIV/AIDS.
And in Mali, a big story about internet stalking of gay men to promote violence against them. You know, names named, pictures shown.
The hunt for homosexuals.
And in Russia, an LGBT activist is being prosecuted for posting links to homosexual propaganda.
And we've told you that, you know, Canada has been quietly accepting refugees from Chechnya, gay male refugees who were being persecuted back there, persecuted and beat up and brutalized. One of them was lured by some Chechens into a car, and they
in Canada.
Yes, in Canada, through a dating app, and they told him his identity as a gay man is a disgrace to his motherland. Before they did release him unharmed, but that's got to be pretty chilling.
Yeah. In Belgrade, Serbia, they held a pride parade. They have held some relatively peacefully in the last few years, but under heavy, heavy security. But the out lesbian prime minister, Ana Brnabić, there in the middle, in the blazer, marched for the first time.
She said, Serbia respects diversity. My message today is that the Serbian government is here for all citizens. But the president of the country, an ultranationalist, said, I have no intention of joining that march. And the church there, the Serbian Orthodox Church, compared homosexuality this week to pedophilia and incest. That's not very nice.
Well, at least the parade took place peacefully with the heavy guards. AIDS news. Hong Kong has gotten on the bandwagon of the modification of gay men donating blood. You can do it if you haven't had sex with another man in the last year. Better than lifetime, but still not the real answer.
And let's give some credit to Bernie Sanders for introducing a Medicare for All bill, which he used to do alone. But this year, it's become, normal for Democrats to want to support this. 15 Democrats, many of them wanting to be president in 2020, elected,
well, that's
got
the
on
important
board.
point. The
16
the
co-sponsors.
fact that potential presidential candidates see this as something they want on their resume is certainly a turnaround.
But we sit here, at least those of us on Obamacare, terrified of what the Republicans are going to do with the Lindsey Graham bill, Cassidy bill, to gut it. And we will know by the end of the month whether they were able to accomplish this. It is very scary. So we hope if you live in areas where you have senators who are moderate to, conservative to moderate Republicans, not crazy, you can get them on board against this.
All right. Shall we move to entertainment news? Well, I didn't really want to watch the Emmys this year.
No.
They're not my favorite thing to watch. I recorded it just in case something would happen, but I started watching it half an hour in so that I could skip through the commercials. And I found myself watching every minute of it because it was really well paced and they didn't have song and dance numbers.
Well, they had Stephen Colbert with the handmaiden coming out, half of whom were drag queens, men.
And Sean
And that was
Spicer.
a statement. That was a transgender statement. A lot of people were offended by Sean Spicer.
I was a little surprised that was so controversial.
Yeah, I mean, he did call him the king of lies or something.
I mean, Sean Spicer was heinous in his role as press secretary, but it's not like he was making policy.
Right.
And he was there to make fun of what he did in his role. But
well, I still don't think he should be a Harvard fellow.
No, I'm much more offended by that. I don't care if he shows up at the Emmys, but Harvard fellow when Chelsea Manning is getting fired from that? No. So anyway, the Emmys, Kate McKinnon won for the second year, out lesbian on Saturday Night Live. That was pretty exciting. Yeah. Black Mirror, San Junipero, an episode of Black Mirror, San Junipero, a Netflix show, won. It was the story of an older black woman and an older white woman having a romance and had a happy ending, and everyone seems to think that was just a spectacular episode. The big news was that RuPaul's Drag Race did not win.
But RuPaul got to play Emmy.
Yes, that was kind of cute.
Stephen Colbert was interviewing Emmy, the woman from the Emmy Awards, and there was a lot of gay stuff in that.
And evidently a lot of gay stuff in The Handmaid's Tale, which I haven't seen, but evidently, you know, it's about an authoritarian society, and some of that has to do with how gay people are treated in that society.
And it was great to see Margaret Atwood up there on the stage.
Unbelievable. Margaret Atwood on the Emmy stage. Stunning.
She wrote The Handmaid's Tale, if you don't know that.
Yeah, and I had to agree with Emily Nussbaum, the New Yorker critic, who said, you know, it was great that Ann Dowd won for The Handmaid's Tale, but really I saw it as a win for The Leftovers, which really was the best drama last year and wasn't even nominated.
Well, it's like Elizabeth Taylor winning for Butterfield 80.
Yeah, it was. And Elizabeth Moss winning for Handmaid's Tale when really she should have won for Top of the Lake. Did you watch the season 2 of that?
No.
I did, because I don't have Netflix, but I do have Sundance. But really the big news at the Emmys was Lena Waithe. We're giving you the prologue, but leave that picture up there.
Yeah,
Lena Waithe looking stunning in that brocade tuxedo.
There on the right,
yeah,
with her co-writer Aziz
Ansari.
Ansari.
Yeah, Aziz is the creator of this series Master of None that is on Netflix, and Lena is an actress on the show, but she also writes for the show, and she was telling him, just in their daily chatting, he asked her about her coming out story, because she is an out lesbian in real life. And so she was telling him about her conversations with her mother, specifically, over a series of Thanksgivings. And he said, that is a fantastic story. We've got to make that into an episode. And so they did this episode called Thanksgiving, of 5 Thanksgivings of these family dinners. Angela Bassett played her mother, and she won for Best Comedy Writer, or they won together for Best Comedy Writer.
And she is the first African-American woman to win for writing a comedy series. That's history.
Yeah, and she starred in the episode.
And she gave this fantastic speech, and she didn't let Aziz talk, but first of all, I gotta thank God. So but then she said, to my girlfriend, I love you more than life itself, Elena. Martine, my chosen family, I love you all. And last but not least, my LGBTQIA family. I see each and every one of you. The things that make us different, those are our superpowers. Every day when you walk out the door and put on your imaginary cape and go out there and conquer the world, because the world would not be as beautiful as it is if you weren't in it. I wish we could have her saying this, but...
well, you can look it up online. We can't air it.
And then she ended by saying, thank you for embracing a little Indian boy from South Carolina and a little queer black girl from the south side of Chicago.
It really,
she
delivered it beautifully and powerfully. It was a surprise to everybody. It was huge energy from her, and it provoked great energy in the room. It was clearly the highlight of the night.
When you get an award, be prepared like that. Don't just thank your agent and your mother.
Right.
It's an opportunity to speak to the nation.
It is. All right, a couple of things coming up. Next Thursday, Will and Grace comes back to NBC after 11 years off. It started 20 years ago. It ran for 8 or 9 years, and now it's coming back. Now what?
They're not going to do anything to upset you.
Well, no, they're going to do the exact same show. Now, but, 20 years older.
Well,
it's very strange.
Apparently the Megan Mullally character is going to be a friend of Melania's.
Yes, of both Trumps, which is perfect. But it's going to be interesting to see if they can pull this off. I did not like the political thing they did last year. I thought that was bad. Well, but the show, Andy and I disagree. I thought the show was hilarious. He thought it was stereotyping and minstrelsy, as he says. But we'll see. Also,
Joe Biden said it changed everything.
Opening this weekend, Battle of the Sexes, the theatrical movie starring Emma Stone as Billie Jean King and Steve Carell as Bobby Riggs, the 1973 Battle of the Sexes tennis match. But I watched, I know a couple of people who've seen it and thought it was kind of It's hard for me to imagine Emma Stone as Billie Jean, but...
I like the trailer.
Well, I watched something that's available on HBO on demand that was made in 2006, Billie Jean King, Portrait of a Pioneer, which is really good, and only an hour, and you can watch it at home.
Love Billie Jean King.
And the other thing to watch out for in a couple of weeks, October 6th on Netflix and in theaters, The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson.
Marsha P. Johnson was a transgender woman who lived on the streets of New York and was a pioneer, Stonewall veteran, was Stonewall participant, pioneer. Oh, we always saw Marsha out there. She would always say, "Don't pay it no mind."
And this is the newest documentary by David France, who made the Oscar-nominated How to Survive a Plague. And we have the trailer of The Death and Life of Marsha
Because
P.
Marsha
Johnson.
died under mysterious circumstances that have not been resolved.
So the movie's really about can they solve her death?
Can we go?
Can
with
we
that
now go to the trailer?
I want to say it was the 4th of July. We were going to meet at midnight, but she never showed up.
She was in danger.
I was there when they pulled her out. Marsha was so full of life.
Marsha P. Johnson was the Rosa Parks of the LGBT movement.
Darling, I want my gay rights now!
Her case has been cold for 25 years. I'm calling from the Anti-Violence Project here in New York City. I want to try to give Marsha justice.
Marsha! Marsha!
Street people and the drag queens were the vanguard of the movement. Stonewall, Marsha and I fought the cops off.
We were in the streets turning over cars.
The movement started the next day.
Marsha was famous all around the world. But even famous people, cases go cold. This is her case.
It's hard for me to believe that she would commit suicide.
A lot of people think it was a murder.
Marsha had a fear about the mafia.
Something's wrong. We keep on running into a brick wall.
You a private investigator?
No.
Don't play detective yourself, all right? Leave this to the people that should handle it.
We want justice here! To find out who the hell murdered Marsha!
I have been beaten. I have been thrown in jail. I have lost my job for gay liberation. Revolution now!
I don't bite my tongue for nobody, which can get you murdered, you know.
The police just brush it off.
I'll get to the bottom of it. There's a massive number of trans women who have been murdered. And they're yelling out from their graves for justice.
Marsha was a beloved figure.
So, as we say, that's going to open on October 6th, both online on Netflix and on in the theaters.
And if you're marking your calendars, you can also mark down that William Finn's Falsettos is going to be on PBS's Live from Lincoln Center on October 27th.
Oh, that is
Check your local
exciting.
listings.
Yeah.
Andrew Rannells, Christian Borle, Stephanie Block, I think, is also there. It's a, you know, we saw it on Broadway. Now
And
you can
liked it very much.
Now you can see it.
Yeah.
And how about that Martin Shkreli? I think he deserved to get thrown in for breaking his, busting
I
his
don't know.
parole.
Do we wish he had gotten a little DNA sample of Hillary?
No. What would that prove? We want a DNA sample of Prince Harry.
Oh, yes, that's true. All right. We'll see you next
All right.
week. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Now I'm going to go to jail.